please be advised that there is material that will be presented that is not AA conference approved material. We believe that Joe and Charlie clearly state when they present material that is not AA conference approved material. The presentation has been color-coded to better assist you as to the origin of the information.
How it works. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our directions. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They're not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a way of life which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we're like now. If you've decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any lengths to get it, then you are ready to follow directions. At some of these, you may balk. You may think you can find an easier, softer way. We doubt if you can. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Remember that you are dealing with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it is too much for you. But there is one who has all power, and that one is God. You must find him now. Half measures will avail you nothing. You stand at the turning point. Throw yourself under his protection and care with complete abandon. Now we think you can take it. Here are the steps we took which are suggested as your program of recovery. 1. Admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care and direction of God as we understood him.
Over to the care and direction of God as we understood him. Remember that. We'll refer to that later on.
4. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5. Admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6. We're entirely willing that God remove all these defects of character. 7. Humbly, on our knees, ask him to remove our shortcomings, holding nothing back. 8. Made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make complete amends to them all. 9. Made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10. Continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our contact with God, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. 12. Having had a spiritual experience as a result of this course of action, we tried to carry this message to others, especially alcoholics, and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Now you may exclaim, what an order, I can't go through with it. Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We're not saints. The point is that we're willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we've set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic.
That's the doctor's opinion. You see it in Bill's story. Some of it in chapter 2 and 3.
The chapter to the agnostic.
Chapter 4.
And our personal adventures before and after.
Bill's story and those stories in the back of the book.
Have been designed to sell you 3 pertinent ideas. Bill was a salesman, you see. A, that you are alcoholic and cannot manage your own life.
Step 1.
B, that probably no human power can relieve your alcoholism.
Part of step 2.
C, that God can and will.
The rest of step 2.
Now, if you're not convinced on these vital issues, you ought to reread the book to this point, or else just throw it away. Pretty implicit instruction, aren't they?
It's quite easy to see what Bill really had in mind. He did not intend for this to be a set of suggestions. He intended for it to be a set of directions. And a set of directions to the individual alcoholic on how to recover from alcoholism. Because he kept saying, you have to do this, and you got to do that, and you. And when the other members saw that, that's when the crap really did hit the fan. They said, Bill, you can't give directions to anybody. You don't have the right to do that. You can't tell anybody what they have to do. And so you're going to have to change that. And they said, Bill, a lot of this stuff in that area of 6 and 7 sounds too much like the Oxford Group program. Too much like these Oxford Group absolute honesty, absolute purity. I said, well, you got to change that. Take it out of here. And Bill said, no, I'm not going to do that. He said, I'm going to leave it just exactly like it is. And they said, no, you're not. Don't you remember that this is your book, or our book, not your book? And we have the right to change whatever we want to. Bill said, I don't care, I'm not going to change this. And they said, yeah, you are. And Bill said, you guys don't realize that these aren't even my words. He said, these are God's words. They came after prayer and meditation. And they said, we don't give a damn whose words they are. You're going to change it anyhow. And the fight was on. They almost destroyed the book and almost destroyed the little fellowship. And finally, Bill very, very reluctantly agreed to make some changes. And there was a non-alcoholic psychiatrist around in those days. And he said, why don't you change it from directions to suggestions? He said, you'll probably get your message across and you won't alienate so many people. And he said, where you keep saying you got to do this, he said, don't do that. He said, tell them this is what we had to do, not what they have to do. And you'll get your message across and you'll not alienate so many people. And Bill very, very reluctantly agreed to those compromises. But Bill was also cunning, baffling, and powerful. Because he said to the little fellowship, okay, I'm going to compromise with you, but you're going to have to compromise with me. And they said, well, what do you want? And he said, I'm tired. He said, I've been fighting with you all along through the different chapters of the book. And now then we're just fighting tooth and toenail. And he said, I'm tired and I'm not going to go through this anymore. He said, if you want me to finish the book, then you give me the authority to do so. And if you don't want to give me the authority to do so, then you finish it yourself. Well, they didn't want to give him that authority, but they sure as hell didn't want to try to finish the book either. And they very reluctantly agreed to that. Now, what Bill knew that they didn't know is 2 pages later, he's going to put you, must, and directions right back in the book. See, they've had them all the way up to here. They jerked them out of how it works. 2 pages later, he puts them right back in. Destroyed some of the continuity of the book. But now that we understand what happened, we can see what he really, really intended to do. The other thing that is so clear, people come to me today and they say, Charlie, how do you work steps 1 and 2? I say, you don't. You don't work steps 1 and 2. They're not working steps. There's no action required in steps 1 and 2. As he finished it up how it works, he said, our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after have been designed to sell you 3 pertinent ideas. A, that you're alcoholic and cannot manage your own life. That is a conclusion of the mind that we draw based upon the information presented to us in the doctor's opinion in the first 4 chapters. B, that probably no human power can relieve your alcoholism. And C, that God can and will. That's another conclusion of the mind that we draw based upon the doctor's opinion and the first 4 chapters. And he said, if you're not convinced on these vital issues, You better go back and read these first chapters. And if you don't want to do that, you might as well just throw the book away. Because you can't go any further unless you got 1 and 2 behind you. Now today, if I can honestly say to myself, you betcha I'm powerless over alcohol, my life has become unmanageable, then I'm through with step 1. If I can say to myself, you betcha I've come to believe that a power greater than myself can restore me to sanity, then I'm through with step 2. And it's not by accident. The very next statement in the book says, being convinced of what? These 3 vital issues. It says we are now at step 3. You see, that's the fallacy in trying to start a newcomer in the big book. Because it starts with step 3, and they don't even have 1 and 2 behind them. And you can't make that decision and really mean it unless you've come to the conclusions in steps 1 and 2. And now that I've reached those conclusions, then I'm ready to make a decision.
The book says being convinced that we were at step 3, which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to God as we understood Him. Just what do we mean by that? Just what do we do? Very, very important questions. We're not ready to take step 3 yet. A little more information. We're going to have to figure out what our will is and what our life is first. And we're going to make a decision to turn our will. And what is our will? Our will is our thinking. And our life is our actions. I'm going to make a decision to let God be the director of my thinking and of my actions.
I think there's 3 key words in step 3 that we need to look at them and be sure that we understand them as the writer understood them. And the first one is the word decision. I hear people today say, I've been in AA for 4 years. My life's still all screwed up, and I don't understand why. Because I turned it over to God 3 years ago when I took step 3. No, we don't turn anything over to God in step 3. We make a decision to turn something over to God in step 3. And a decision will do no good unless it's followed by a course of action necessary to bring that decision into being. Good example in my life. A few years ago, Barbara and I decided to go to California and visit some of our relatives in Los Angeles. But we didn't do anything to carry that decision out. And sure enough, we didn't get to California that year either. Next year, we decided to go to California and visit our relatives. And again, we didn't do anything to carry that out. So sure enough, we didn't get to California the second year either. 3rd year in a row, we made the decision. Only this time, it was a little different. I took the car down and had it serviced. Barbara packed the clothes and a little food. And we got in our car and we drove from our home to Tulsa, Oklahoma. Then we drove to Oklahoma City. Then we drove to Amarillo, Texas. Then we drove to Albuquerque, New Mexico. Then we drove to Flagstaff, Arizona. Then we drove to Barstow, California. Then we drove to San Bernardino, California. And then we drove to Los Angeles. And sure enough, one day we ended up sitting in my brother's house in Los Angeles, visiting with him. Not because I made a decision to do so, but because we took the action necessary to carry it out. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 are all action steps designed to do one thing and one thing only, to carry out this decision that we're making in step 3. Now, what is it we're deciding to do? We're making a decision to turn our will over to the care and direction of God as we understand Him. Now, what is our will? Our will is nothing more than our thinking apparatus. Our will is nothing more than our mind. It's nothing more than this thing in our head that tells us what to do and tells us what not to do. A perfect example of tying will and thinking together is, let's say that some of us are beginning to approach the end of our lives, and There's a few of us in here that are getting fairly close to it, putting it off as long as we can, but getting reasonably close. And I begin to get worried about what's going to happen with all this material junk that I've gathered up since I've been sober. Hell, I don't want it to be lost. So I go down and I sit down with an attorney, and I tell that attorney, I want this to go to my spouse, this is to go to my daughter, this is to go to my son, so on, so forth. Now that attorney takes my thinking that day coming out of my mind and writes it down in a legal form on a piece of paper. I sign it, the attorney may sign it as a witness, and we put it in a safe. Now, sure enough, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, I kick the bucket. And if my family's like most of them, they're going to call the undertaker and say, come and get him ready, and let's get him out to the cemetery and get him in the ground about as soon as we can. You know, hell, used to, they waited 4, 5, 6, 7 days. They don't do that anymore. They do it fast today. And the undertaker gets me and gets me ready, and he puts me in a box. And they take the box out to the cemetery, and they suspend it over a hole in the ground. And a minister is going to say a few words, and I hope and pray that there'll be some alcoholics that'll say a few words too. And they begin to drop me into the ground. Now, if my family's like the rest of them, they don't even wait till that box gets to the bottom of the hole. They jump in the car and they go right back to that attorney's office. And that attorney gets out that piece of paper and reads to them what my thinking was 3 or 4 or 5 years ago prior to that time. Now, we know that they call that piece of paper a will. It's not by accident. Will, thinking, mind, they are all synonymous. Now, I'm making a decision to turn my will over to the care and direction of God as I understand Him, my thinking apparatus, my mind. Now, what else am I making a decision to turn over? Well, I'm making a decision to turn my life over to the care and direction of God as I understand Him. What is my life? My life is nothing more than my actions. What I am today, right now, as of this moment, sitting behind this table, is the sum accumulative total of all the actions I've taken in my entire lifetime has made me just exactly what I am right now, this moment. All action is born in thought.
Say that again, please.
All action is born in thought. It's not by accident. The step says will and life. I hear some people read it backwards. Life and will. No, it says will and life. If all action is born in thought, then it stands to reason that whatever my actions are, they're based upon how I think. If my thinking is okay, chances are my actions will be okay, and chances are my life will be okay. If my thinking is lousy, and God, it was lousy when I got to AA, I'll guarantee you, if my thinking is lousy, then chances are my actions are going to be lousy. And chances are my life's going to be lousy too. And when I got to step 3, I went to my sponsor and I said, Neil, I don't think I can take step 3. And he said, why? And I said, because if I turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand Him, I have no idea what He would have me be. And He may want me to be a missionary. And He may want to send me to China or to Africa or even up into Canada. And I damn sure don't want to be a missionary. And he just laughed and stood back and he said, well, let's look at it this way. He said, at least it wouldn't be in the hands of an idiot, would it? He said, Charlie, all your lifetime, you've been a selfish, self-centered, self-willed human being. You've always done what you wanted to do whenever you wanted to do it, and to hell with the rest of them. Isn't that right? And I said, you know it is. He said, just think. If God could direct your thinking, it might become better. And if your thinking becomes better, your actions are going to become better. And if your actions become better, your life's going to become better. But he said, Charlie, left on your own resources, you don't stand a chance. He said, you'll keep on thinking the same way you've always thought. You'll keep on taking the same old actions. Your life will become an absolute living hell. And he said, because of that, you've almost destroyed your life. And then he said, just as important, you've almost destroyed the lives of those around you that care for you. He said, just think. If God could direct it, it's going to become better. And if it becomes better than your life, and just as important, the lives of those around you that care for you will become better too also. He said, there is absolutely no way that God could do a worse job of it than you've done. And he got it through to me in such a manner that I began to understand. And he stepped back about 3 feet, and he stuck his bony old finger right in the middle of my chest. He said, now you got to make a decision. He said, I wish I could do this for you, but I can't. This is a job you'll have to do by yourself. You have to make the decision.
The book goes on to say the first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will could hardly be a success. On that basis, we're almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. Most people try to live by self-propulsion. Each person is like an actor who wants to run the show. Is forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, the rest of the players in his own way. If his arrangement was only, stay put, if only people would do as he wished, the show would be great. Everybody, including himself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. See, he told us how it works, and now he tells us why it won't work. Because we're trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, and the people in our own way. And I'm convinced, even today sometimes, if they would only mind me, things would be wonderful. Life would be great. There's only one thing wrong with the self-will. Everybody's got one. My wife's sitting right back there. Stand up, Phyllis. There she is. As sweet as she is, she got a self-will. And my will for her is one thing, and her will for her is another. And any time I keep trying to impress my will on her, we have problems, you see. So the first thing I have to do is quit playing God in her life. It doesn't work. Our book says here that the first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will could hardly be a success. Some 12 or 13 years after Bill wrote the big book about Alcoholics Anonymous, through the consultation and contact with some of the world's best minds on what make people tick, and through the experience of helping a lot of drunks, Bill got some more information about what makes us tick. And he wrote in the 12 and 12. He wrote the 12 and 12 to give us some more information about the steps. He had a lot more experience about the fourth step at that time. And he's going to tell us more about what's going to cause his people to tick. And here, he's going to tell us all about what makes a self-willed person in this book. And in the 12 and 12, in the area of the fourth step, the first 3 or 4 pages, he talks about the basic instincts of life, the things that we need to know and understand what makes us tick. And after all that experience, he put this down for us. And now we're going to look at that information, the basic instincts of life, which creates self-will, information that we need to know. And I needed to have a working knowledge of this information in order to do the third step, or the third column in the fourth step when we get down to it. So now we're going to do that at this time.
You know, I think we have to face the fact that when Bill wrote the big book, 1937, 38, early part of 39, Bill hadn't been sober but 3 or 4 years. And Bill was not a great spiritual giant. Bill was not a great student of human nature. Bill was a New York City stock speculator and a night school lawyer. But he managed to write one of the most spiritual books dealing with human nature the world's ever seen, the big book Alcoholics Anonymous. There's no doubt in my mind that God took Bill's hand and used Bill's mind and Bill's hand to write the big book Alcoholics Anonymous. I just don't believe Bill could have done it by himself. But 13, 14 years later, Bill knew a lot more about spirituality. He knew a lot more about human nature. And I believe Bill had some information that he wanted to give to us that he didn't know to put in the big book when he wrote it. And using the information that he put in the 12 and 12, then we can better work the steps according to the big book Alcoholics Anonymous. We do not believe that the 12 and 12 is designed to replace the big book. In fact, you can't work the steps out of the 12 and 12 because there's no directions in there on how to do them. They're simply a series of information essays to give us more knowledge. The only book that we have and the only book we've ever had that tells us how to work the steps is the big book Alcoholics Anonymous. But some of that information that Bill had learned in those years between the big book and the 12 and 12 is some of the greatest stuff I've ever read. He taught me more on the first 3 or 4 pages of step 4 in the 12 and 12. He taught me more about what makes me tick, about what makes me think the way I think and act the way I act, than I'd ever learned from any other source. And he talked there about these 3 basic instincts of life. Now you see those terms in the example on step 4 in the big book, but he didn't explain them, and I don't think he could explain them at that time. He talked about the social instinct, the security instinct, and the sex instinct. And he said all human beings are born with these 3 basic instincts of life, that they're absolutely necessary for survival of the human race. And he said if we didn't have those instincts, sooner or later the human race would simply fail to survive. And the first one he talked about is the social instinct. And he said all human beings are born with the desire to come together in groups with other people. And he said all human beings are born with a desire to be liked and respected and accepted by other people. And he said if we didn't have those desires, if we cared nothing about each other, the world would go into a dog-eat-dog situation, complete anarchy would reign, and sooner or later under those circumstances, sure enough, the human race would fail to survive. And he used several terms in talking about this social instinct of life. He uses the term companionship. And that's nothing more than wanting to belong or to be accepted by other people. So many of us grew up on the outside looking in. So many of us wanted to be a part of and knew we could not be. So many of us were scared to death that what we said, what we did would be wrong, and other people would laugh at us and wouldn't accept us a part of society. Hell, that's one of the reasons we drank. Because when we drank, we didn't feel that way anymore. He used the term prestige. Prestige is wanting to be recognized as the leader of the group. And the world needs leaders. I guess back in the old caveman days, somebody had to say, Jack, get behind that tree with your spear. Joe, you get over here with your club. And Mary Lou and I are going to run this sucker through here, and we'll have something to eat after a while. Somebody has to do that. And most of us will take one of 2 directions, either let me be a part of or let me be the leader of. And in either case, it's going to be based upon what other people think of us. If they like us and accept us and respect us, then we can become and we can do those things. If they reject us, we can't. Self-esteem. Now, self-esteem is nothing more than what we think of ourselves. And that's usually high or low. And that's usually based upon what other people think of us or what we think other people think of us. If they seem to like us and accept us and respect us, we feel pretty good toward ourselves. But if we feel that they don't like us and they reject us, then we feel pretty lousy toward ourselves. He uses the word pride. And I'm glad I got in the habit of going to the dictionary. I always thought that pride was something you're supposed to have. And all I ever wanted to be as a kid growing up was a man who walked tall with pride and a little bit sideways, just like John Wayne did. That's all I ever wanted to be. But I went to the dictionary and I find out that pride is an excessive and unjustified opinion of oneself. It's either too high or it's too low. And in either case, it's really not the truth. Personal relationships is nothing more than our relations with the world and the people in it. And our ambitions are our plans for the future, to gain recognition, to gain power, to gain prestige, etc. All human beings have those, and they are all good things. They are God-given. Now, if we want to be liked and accepted and respected by the world and the people in it, the first thing we got to find out is, well, what do they want from us? And society teaches us those things to us as we grow up. One part of the world is to have a good education. Another part of the world is to be a large landowner. Another part of the world is to have a large family. It can be any number of things, and it'll vary in different parts of the world. And based upon what we're taught and what we see as kids growing up, then we do write a script for ourselves. We determine what it is that we're going to be. And we begin to set goals for ourselves to reach in order to be liked, accepted, and respected. And if we're going to reach those goals, we're going to have to work at them. You can't be a bum and sit on your duff and have people like you and accept you and respect you. At the same time, we're going to have to make some sacrifices. There are some things that I would like to do as a human being that are very pleasurable and very exciting. But if I do them and you catch me at it, you're not going to like me at all. And I don't think you and I would do the work necessary to reach the goal, nor make the sacrifices necessary to be accepted, unless we get a reward for doing so. And the great reward is that great feeling of accomplishment that comes at the moment of successful completion of the goal. Bill said it in his story. He said, I had arrived. How many of us have set that goal for the education or whatever it might be? Literally work our tails off for years. And the day we accomplish the goal and they pat us on the back and they say, Joe, you're a good man. You're a smart fella. You're doing great. There's one of those feelings that come over us which is an absolutely indescribably wonderful feeling. But the only thing wrong with it seems to be just a temporary feeling. No sooner do we reach the goal, we get the recognition and the praise, and we look around and we say, well, hell's bells. Is this all there is to it? And we set another goal. And we work and we work and we strive and we strive and we sacrifice and we reach the new goal and we get the recognition and the praise and it feels good, but it doesn't last long, and we set another goal. It seems to create within we human beings an insatiable desire for more and more power, more and more recognition, more and more acceptance, and are not giving it to us the way we think they ought to. So what do? Well, we start taking shortcuts. We start doing a little lying, a little conning, a little manipulating, a little trying to govern other people. We begin to climb on people's backs and step on their toes. And the instant we do so, we create pain and suffering for others. They in turn retaliate against us and create pain and suffering for us. It's plain that a life run on self-will can hardly ever be a success, because under those conditions we're always in collision with people, places, and things, and it robs us entirely of peace of mind. The second basic instinct he talked about is the security instinct. And he said all human beings are born with the desire to be secure in the future. And he said if we didn't have that desire, We wouldn't provide the food, the clothing, the shelter, the things necessary to be able to survive, and the human race would simply fail to survive. Now, I know in AA today we try to live one day at a time, but I also know just about everybody in this room has got an insurance policy. And the purpose of the insurance policy is to protect ourselves in the future. It's a God-given thing, and it's good. Now, if we want to be secure in the future, we have to again determine, well, what is it we need in order to be secure? Society teaches that to us also. As we're kids growing up, and what we hear and what we see, we decide what's going to be necessary for our security. And if you're going to be secure in the future, you're going to have to work at it. You can't be a bum, sit on your duff, and still be secure. Plus, you're going to have to make some sacrifices. You can't blow it all today and be secure tomorrow. And I don't think you and I would do the work necessary to make the sacrifices necessary unless we get a reward for doing so. And the great reward comes once again at the moment of successful completion of the goal. How many of us have set those goals as kids growing up for the new bicycle, for the new dress, for the new shoes, for the new car, for the new home, for the new piece of business? And we work and we work and we strive and we strive. And the day we reach the goal and nobody can take it away from us, my God, what a great feeling that is. When I was a kid growing up, hardly anybody owned their own homes. Nearly everybody rented. And people would rent a little old 3 or 4 room house for years. And once in a while they could scrape together enough money to make a down payment on that house. And they would pay and pay and pay and pay and pay and pay. And the day they got that sucker paid off, they celebrated, called in all the neighbors, and they celebrated by burning the mortgage. My God, what a great feeling that was. The only thing wrong with it, no sooner do you reach the goal, whatever it is you set for yourself, then you look around and this guy is driving a Cadillac and I've got a Chevrolet. This one over here has got a Brooks Brothers suit and I bought mine at Kmart's. This guy over here has got a 2-story house with 12,000 square feet in it, and mine's a little old 3-room shack. And it causes us to set another goal. And we work and we work and we strive and we strive and we sacrifice and we reach the new goal and it feels great. But we look around and say, is this all? And we set another goal. It seems to create within we human beings an insatiable desire for more and more and more and more. And they're not giving it to us fast enough. We're not getting it the way we think we ought to. So what do? Well, we lie. We cheat. We con. We manipulate. We steal. We step on other people's toes and climb on their backs. And the instant we do so, we create pain and suffering for others. They, in turn, retaliate against us and create pain and suffering for us. Plain old life run on self-will can hardly ever be a success because under those conditions, we're always in collision with people, places, and things. Third basic instinct he talks about is the sex instinct. And always before I start on it, I've got to have a drink of coffee.
He gets excited when he talks about this.
I noticed 4 or 5 of you just straightened right up as soon as I said the sex. Bill said all human beings are born with a desire to have sex. He said it may get turned off by bad teachings or bad happenings, but he said all of us are born with a desire to have sex. Because if we don't have sex, we can't reproduce ourselves. And if we don't reproduce ourselves, then sooner or later, the human race is going to fail to survive. Now, just like the other two, if you're going to reproduce yourself through the sexual instinct, through the sex act, well, you're going to have to work at it. You know, hell, you can do more work in 3 minutes of sex than you will do all day digging a ditch. Don't you older guys remember how it used to be when we got through with it? My God, you just fall over sideways. The sweat's just pouring off of you. You can hardly get your breath. You feel like you've died, gone to heaven, come back 2 or 3 times. And I don't think we would do that kind of work if we didn't get a reward for doing so. And the great reward that we get is that great feeling, both physically and emotionally, at the moment of successful completion of the sex act. One of the greatest feelings a human being can experience. The only thing wrong with it, though, just like the other two, it seems to be just a temporary feeling. Hell, you no sooner get through with doing it than you get to thinking about doing it again. And it's such a pleasurable and exciting thing that the next thing you know, we get to thinking about doing it in different ways, in different positions, with different people. And the next thing you know, we're doing it at the wrong time, in the wrong way, with the wrong people. And the instant we do so, we create pain and suffering for others. They, in turn, retaliate against us and create pain and suffering for us. The very 3 things that God has given us for our survival, He made them pleasurable so we would do them, and there's where the rub comes in. They are so pleasurable that left on self-will, we simply cannot keep from overdoing in one or more of these areas. If every human being on earth today could fulfill these 3 basic instincts at the level that God intended for them to be fulfilled, there would be no conflict on earth today. But all human beings will overdo in one or more of these areas. Now, if you'll notice in that little picture, there's a circle coming out of those 3 basic instincts that's called self. That's what creates self. That's what creates self-will. Now, it's impossible to live on self-will without overdoing in one or more of these areas and ending up hurting other people and places and things. And the instant we hurt other people, then they retaliate against us. You'll see another little circle called wrongs. And somewhere in AA we got the idea when we saw the word wrongs, it's a list of dirty, filthy, nasty items. No, that isn't it at all. You go to the dictionary, you'll find several definitions. One definition of the word wrong is incorrect believing. Incorrect believing. And in a little while we're going to find out that's exactly what a resentment is. An incorrect judgment and an incorrect believing about what those people have done to us. Another definition of the word wrong is fears, also defined as incorrect believing. The majority of our fears when we get here, although they may have some basis, they're not really the truth. Another definition of the word wrong is the harms and the hurts we do to other human beings. We're not bums. We got a conscience. We do things while drinking we normally wouldn't do while sober. And we hurt these people, and then when we come to ourselves, our conscience really eats us up. And we're filled with guilt and remorse and fear of what they're going to do whenever they find out. It's very easy to spot a selfish, self-centered human being. There will always be 3 common manifestations of a life run on self-will. Number 1, we're madder than hell. Damn him and damn her, and by God I'll show them, and they're not going to treat me that way, and I'll get even with those so blah, 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 blah. Selfish, self-centered human being scared to death. Can't depend on God. Can't depend on other human beings. If we're reaching the end of the road, we can't depend on ourselves any longer, and we're absolutely scared to death. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but we know when it gets here, it ain't going to be worth a damn, whatever it might be. A selfish, self-centered human being cannot keep from harming other people. And the guilt and the remorse and the fear associated with that just literally eats us up. There's no way that I can have any peace of mind, serenity, and happiness unless I do something about those things and get them out of my mind. I'm making a decision to let God direct my thinking. And those things direct my thinking, and God can't. And it's just that simple. You know, God gave us self-will a long, long time ago. And he said, I'll love you enough that I'll let you destroy yourself on self-will. He said, I'll never take it back from you unless you freely give it back to me. And there's no way we can give it back as long as it's filled with the kind of crap that's in the mind of a person running on self-will. If my mind is filled with resentments, if my mind is filled with fear, if my mind is filled with guilt and remorse, those things direct my thinking, and if they do, God can. It's just that simple. So I'm going to have to do something about the resentments, about the fears, and about the harms and hurts I've done to another human being before I can clear my mind enough that God can begin to direct my thinking. And the first thing I've got to do is make the decision to let God direct it, and then take the action necessary to remove these things from my mind so God can direct it. We're now at step 3.
Let's go to page 62, please. So he told us how it works, and now he's going to tell us some more about why it won't work. He said selfishness and self-centeredness. That we think is the root of our troubles. We're driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, self-pity. We step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation. But we invariably find that sometime in the past we've made decisions based on self, which later put us in a position to be hurt. I'll read that again. But we invariably find that sometime in the past we've made decisions based upon the satisfaction of our basic instincts of life, which later put us in a position to be hurt. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves. And the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us, and God makes that possible. And there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without his aid. Many of us have had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we could not live up to them even though we would like to. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help. You can't heal a sick mind with a sick mind. We can't think our way out of it. We must have God's help.
One of the greatest mistakes we see in AA is people are trying to make themselves better. And we can't make ourselves better. Self-will cannot overcome self-will. The only thing can overcome self-will is the power that made it in the first place. And that's God as we understand Him. We've got to have God's help if we're going to do anything about this situation.
He said this is the how and why of it. And here's one of the instructions. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work.
If this is a God-directed world, and everything I read tends to make me believe so, then those of us who have been self-directed, and those of us who've tried to direct not only ourselves, but everybody and everything around us, then we've been trying to do God's work for Him. And we're not God. We just been playing at being God.
It says next, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director.
Now He's got His word back in here. Not our suggester, our director. From here on, it'll be directions and you and must. No more suggestions.
He is the principal, we're His agents. He's the Father, we're His children. Most good ideas are simple. And this concept was the keystone to the new and triumphant arch of which we passed to freedom. And I almost missed that. This simple little idea. See, I used to pray like this: God give me this, and God give me that, and God give me a new car, and God give my wife back, God help me make more money. I use God like you would an errand boy. Send him out and take care of stuff. You know, and I read in that other big book one time, it said that God worked for 6 days and then He rested. And to my knowledge, He never did go back to work anymore. It looks to me like there's going to be any work being done around here. It's going to be me. He is the principal. We're the agents. He's the Father. We're the children. Most good ideas are simple. And I almost missed that simple little idea. He's the boss. I work for Him. That's the idea.
This concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. And this again, he's referring to that wonderfully effective spiritual structure that we're going to build. And now he tells us what it is. It's an arch. And we're going to pass through that arch to freedom. And the keystone is a stone that's right up in the top of the arch. It's cut in a certain manner. And the stones on each side lean against the keystone. And the keystone supports the arch. If the keystone is cut right, fit right, it will support the arch. If it's not cut and fit right, if it's faulty, it'll slip out and the arch will collapse. The keystone of the arch through which we're going to pass to freedom is this simple little idea that we're going to let God be the director. He's the father, we're the children. He's the employer, we are the employee. Now from step 3 on, as we begin to move into the action area, you're going to find that there's prayer in every step. Every step recognizes that self cannot overcome self. We got to have God's help. And at each step we take from here on will bring about certain positive happenings. We're going to continue to build that arch. We don't have to wait till step 12 to get something out of it. From here on, we'll get something positive out of each step. Joe?
Page 63, it says, "Now when we sincerely took such a position," the one on bottom of page 62, He's the Father, we're the children, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer. Being all-powerful, He provided what we needed if we kept close to Him and performed His work well. See, I'm supposed to perform His work well. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. More and more, we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life.
Now, look at these results.
As we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of His presence, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. We were reborn. And boy, I used to hate that idea about being reborn. They used to come over to my house on Monday night and talk to me about being reborn in that little church that was up the road from there. And I really didn't understand what that meant, not really. And they won't go over and talk to me about being reborn, and I'd run them off. I said, man, this is Monday Night Football. You're coming here to talk to me about that stuff? Get out of here. I didn't want to hear it, you see. I was kind of mad about it. And after I got sober for a while, I read this story in this other big book. This guy's name was Nicodemus. Nicodemus was dumb as I was. I mean, dumb as a stump when it comes to spiritual matters. And he went to this fellow who was talking about being reborn, and he said, what do you mean being reborn? What do you mean by that? You mean I got to go back into my mother's womb and be reborn? I could see him shaking his head at him. It's like my sponsor shook his head at me many, many times. And he said, when I'm talking to you about being reborn, I'm talking about the renewing of your mind. Old ideas cast aside, new ones accepted. I'm going to be reborn, not in my body, but in my thinking. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes which become the guiding force in me are going to be suddenly cast to one side. Now I could understand that. And I went to that little church on a Sunday morning, and I knew what they did down there on Sunday morning, just about 11 o'clock. I suspect they'll be doing it around here about 11 o'clock tomorrow, too, somewhere. And I got there 2 or 3 minutes before 11. I won't get there too early. I might hear something that'll help me, you know. So I got there about 2 or 3 minutes before 11, and sure enough, the guy asked me to come there and to do the third step prayer. Basically, that's what I went there for. And our book says we are now at step 3. Now I can take the action of the third step. And I went down there as humbly and as honestly and as sincerely as I know how to do. And I said this, God, I offer myself to you to deal with me and do with me as you will. Relieve me of the bondage of self that I may better do your will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those that I would help of your power, your love, and your way of life. May I do your will always.